What's up, friends? Thanks for tuning in again. For those of you who missed last week, I'm Ashley, and last week we talked about dealing with authority. I mean, come on. We all have the teacher that we think is so strange, or the coach we disagree with, or that parent we think is way too hard on us for no reason. And when we push back against their authority, it's because something in us feels like they don't really deserve the authority they have. Now, maybe you feel that these people haven't earned your respect for one reason or another. Or maybe they're asking you to do something you disagree with or feel is unsafe. Like maybe your teacher says you're not allowed to talk about your faith in school, but you really want to talk about all the great things God's doing in your life. Or maybe one of your parents is telling you to do one thing, but they're totally doing the opposite. Situations like these can make honoring authority figures really hard. But why is that exactly? What is it that makes following authority difficult? Well, I think one reason might be that making fun of our authority figures makes us feel in control of something. Nobody likes being told what to do all the time. And when we don't have much of a choice when it comes to controlling certain parts of our lives, naturally we react by going behind their back and making fun of them. Or maybe the reason we don't follow authority figures is because we don't feel like we have to. I mean, we feel justified in ignoring them. We feel justified ignoring them because we truly don't think they're good at being in charge. And besides all that, we don't have to feel as bad about our own flaws when we can point out the flaws of our leader. So, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to just pretend that every authority figure is deserving of their position? I mean, how are we supposed to respect and follow authority when sometimes it feels like they don't deserve it? Luckily, we aren't the first generation of people in history who've struggled with authority. In fact, there's a story in the Old Testament, which is the first part of the Bible, about a guy named David who had to decide how to respond to an authority figure in his life who didn't quite deserve being in the position of power. You see, David found himself in the exact same place we find ourselves now, struggling to obey people in authority. So let me tell you a little bit about this story. God chose David to be the next king of Israel. But at that time, there was a slight problem. You see, there was this guy named Saul, and he was already king. And he did not want to hand over his throne. So Saul decided to take matters into his own hands. And he decided to kill David. So what did David do? He ran, of course. For years, he ran for his life. And as usual, King Saul and his army were chasing David. And they were really getting close to finding him. And you see, David and his friends must have known that the army of Saul was close because they decided they needed to hide in a cave. And it's a really good thing that they did because all of a sudden, Saul and all his men walk up right in front of the exact cave. And around that time, apparently, Saul decided he needed to go to the bathroom. And guess what? He decided to go in the cave that David was in and take a potty break. All right, let's read what happens next. So if you have your Bible or you have a Bible app, open to 1 Samuel chapter 24, and we're gonna look at verses 3 and 4. My app shut down, guys, sorry. He, Saul, came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there. And Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." Then David crept up unnoticed, and guess what he did? He cut off the corner of Saul's robe. I bet you weren't expecting that. He literally cut off the robe. He didn't kill him. He cut off his robe. I mean, that was David's chance. Years of frustration and confusion finally came to that moment. I mean, Saul was not a good authority figure in David's life, and David finally had the chance to do something about it. I mean, one slash of the sword, oh yeah, he uses a sword, not scissors, but even his own men were begging him to do it. What? This was not how it was supposed to go down. This was supposed to be the day when David finally got what was his. But that's not what happened. In fact, Saul actually left the cave without ever knowing that David was there. And while David could have stayed hidden, he decided to then run out of the cave, get Saul's attention, and show him the piece of cloth in his hand. And then Saul knew, oh my goodness, David was in the cave, and he spared my life. And what David said next explained it all. We're gonna jump down to verse 12. This is what David said. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. David could have taken Saul out right then and there. And if we're being honest, he probably had good reason to do it. But what David realized is that even though Saul was his authority, and a bad authority at that, ultimately David had to answer to God. He knew that in honoring Saul, even when Saul didn't deserve it, David was ultimately honoring God. And the same is true for us. When you honor authority, you honor God. In the middle of that dark cave, David didn't just think about himself and King Saul. He actually thought about God. Even when Saul was crazy, cruel, and tried to kill him, David knew it was God who was really in charge. It was God who put Saul on the throne after all. I mean, it was really God asking David to honor Saul, not for Saul's sake, but for God's. Why? Because when you honor authority, you honor God. The good news for you is that honoring the hard to honor authority in your life should be a lot easier to do than it was for David. I mean, nobody is trying to kill you for the throne, right? It's important to remember that while David certainly honored Saul by sparing his life, he didn't necessarily obey him. I mean, if David just obeyed Saul's wishes, he'd be dead, right? David knew that he didn't have to obey the things Saul was asking him to do, mostly because he knew it would cost him his life. But David did know that he had to find a way to honor Saul anyway. Saul was still the king, and because of that, David still had to be under his leading, even when he was wrong. David had to honor Saul, and the same, unfortunately, is true for us. To help you honor the people in charge in your life, especially the ones who are hard to honor, I want to give you 4 simple things to do today. These are easy action steps that you can take whenever you run across that authority figure who just doesn't feel like they deserve your respect. Ready? Here they are. First, speak gently. Don't raise your voice, don't be mean, don't call them names. Choose your words wisely when you're talking both to them and about them. Secondly, argue respectfully. Speak your mind, but really listen too. I mean, it's okay for you to speak up when you feel you've been wronged, misunderstood, or disrespected, but you've got to be willing to listen too. Third, forgive gracefully. Forgive the leaders in your life who maybe haven't done the best job leading you. Remember that your authority figures are people too, and they're gonna make mistakes. And lastly, follow thoughtfully. At the end of the day, you've got to think through what the authority figures in your life are asking of you, and then you can make a choice of what and who you can and can't follow. And if you choose not to follow, know that there will probably be consequences to your actions. Remember, how you navigate this matters, not just for today, but for the future as well, because remember, when you honor authority, you honor God. Now, before I'm done, I want to say again that some of you are in situations where your authority is unsafe. You're maybe being mistreated or abused, and if that's the case, I want you to know that submitting and following those authority figures isn't what we're asking you to do. If that's you, I encourage you to reach out to a trusted adult about the situation you're in. We want to help. And if you're wondering whether or not your situation falls into this category, we'd love to talk with you about that. Ask your small group leader or youth leader to chat with you privately before you leave. Now, as you leave, I want you to think about this question. How are you doing when it comes to honoring the authorities in your life?